In this video, we'll talk about absolute value equations, and they look something like the one that I just wrote, and we read it: absolute value of x equals 7. So that's the how we read the equation. Those straight bars represent the absolute value, and it's a function, so it's applied to something. You are never gonna see just these two bars like this without anything in between them. So what does absolute value mean? Well, absolute value means the distance from the origin to that number. So absolute value of something is the distance from the origin to that number, and it's always positive. So what I mean by that, if this is the number line and this is the origin, if I want to find out the absolute value of 7, it's going to be 7 because the distance from 0 to 7 is 7. If I want to find out the absolute value of -7, it would be also 7 because the distance from -7 to 0 is 7. There are 7 steps to get there. So because absolute value is a distance, it's always going to produce a positive number. Now the definition, absolute value of x, so if I want to write it analytically as a function, we write it equals x if x is greater than or equal to 0, or negative x if x is less than 0. And this usually confuses people because we said it's going to be always positive. So what does that mean? Well, if I ask you to find absolute value of 7, you're going to say, well, because 7 is greater than 0, it's going to produce exactly the value 7. If I want to find absolute value of -7, well, because -7 is less than 0, I'm going to look at the second part of this function. So it's going to be opposite of the value that I have in here. So that's going to be opposite of -7, which is 7. So the same thing, if I have absolute value of x minus 3, so not just x, if it's a function here, an expression, I can get x minus 3 if x is greater than or equal to 3, or opposite, so opposite of x minus 3, which means negative x minus 3, which means negative x plus 3, or 3 minus x. So that's where this 3 minus x is coming from, for x less than 3. So this is the definition. But there are a few problems here or equations that we can solve using absolute value. So let's take a look at a few of them. So let's take a look at problem 1. Absolute value of x equals 3. So what does this mean? It means that x equals 3 because absolute value of 3 equals 3, or x equals -3 because absolute value of -3 is producing 3 as well. Usually students make the mistake to write only the positive value, so basically solving half of the problem. Let's take a look at the example 2. Absolute value of x minus 2 equals 12. So how do we solve it? We want to isolate absolute value on one side. So I'm going to add 2 to both sides, and we get absolute value of x equals 14. So now the equation that we got is very similar to the one from part 1, which is going to break down into x equals 14 or x equals -14. And we found 2 solutions. Let's take a look at problem 3. Problem 3 is 2 absolute value of x plus 32 equals 20. So 2 absolute value of x equals, well, if I subtract 32 from both sides, I get -12. And if I divide by 2, I get absolute value of x equals -6. So what happens here is we have no solution or empty set, because no matter what number you replace in absolute value is never going to produce a negative number. So in absolute value, I can have a positive or negative number, but outside it's always going to be positive. So even if you were trying to think, well, absolute value of negative 6. Well, absolute value of negative 6, it's positive 6. So that's not going to be equal to negative 6. So that makes it no solution. Let's take a look at problem 4. Absolute value of x plus 8 minus 3 equals negative 3. It was actually z plus 8, but I changed the letter. I'm going to add 3 to both sides, and absolute value of x plus 8 equals 0. So what does that mean? It means, well, absolute value of what? What should we have here to give us 0? We should have exactly 0. So x plus 8 equals 0 makes it x equals negative 8. And you know what? We can even check by going to the original problem, and instead of x, we put negative 8. So we have absolute value of negative 8 plus 8 minus 3. Does that equal negative 3? Well, absolute value of 0 is 0, and negative 3 equals negative 3, so it checks out. So x equals negative 8 is a solution. Let's solve example 7. Example 7 is a little bit different than the other ones because it has two absolute values on both sides. So this is going to break down into 2x minus 5 equals x plus 1, so both functions are equal to each other, or 2x minus 5 equals the opposite of x plus 1, so negative x plus 1. Because if I'm going to replace here with negative x plus 1 in absolute value, it's going to produce positive. So now let's solve these two equations. So I'm going to subtract x and add 5. So it's going to give us x equals 6. So that's one solution. Or, and this one, I'm going to open the parentheses first. So this means negative 1 times x is negative x. Negative 1 times 1 is minus 1. So add x to both sides and add 5 to both sides, and we get 3x equals 4. Divide by 3 and get x equals 4 over 3. So we got two solutions, x equals 5 or x equals 4 over 3. If you replace any of them in the initial equation, you are going to get true statements. So in conclusion, if k is positive, greater than 0, then you can have these three expressions. Absolute value of x equals k will mean x equals k or x equals negative k. You see how this symbol here from absolute value, right? Here it disappeared, right? We don't have it anymore. So once we drop the absolute value sign, then our k could be positive or negative. Another type of equations could be absolute value of an expression equals k. So how do we break that down into expression equals k or expression equals negative k? So no more absolute value symbols. And a third situation could be absolute value of expression 1 equals absolute value of expression 2, exactly like the last problem that we did. So what do? Well, we drop the absolute value symbol and we equate the expressions. So expression 1 equals expression 2, or expression 1 equals negative expression 2. So making sure we write both situations, we will produce all the solutions that we can have. So in other words, I can also add this. We can have, so in terms of solutions, we can have two solutions, we can have one solution, or no solution when we deal with absolute value equations.